And on the science, the company engaged in a disinformation or a campaign to cloud the science, and talk about that campaign to question, introduce doubt into the science of climate change.
Yeah, so a series of investigations have brought out a pretty rich body of evidence about what this campaign really amounted to. And I think it's important to set one frame of context, which is that, the Kyoto Accords were quite unpopular in the United States when they were enacted. In fact, there was a 97 or 93 to nothing vote in the United States Senate telling President Clinton, don't even bother to send these over for ratification. But they were mostly unpopular in industrial America and across the Congress on fairness grounds and on the grounds that the economic burdens that would be imposed on the United States by Kyoto didn't warrant paying. But there were very few corporations that did what ExxonMobil did, which was to take an aggressive and often surreptitious campaign, put it into motion, partly through the American Petroleum Institute, the trade group, but partly on its own dime, to basically develop, support, fund, often uniquely fund, campaign organizations, communications organizations, free market groups, sometimes purpose-built, to attack the credibility of the science itself. That was what was really distinctive about their role in the effort to undermine Kyoto. And they had the checkbook to undertake that campaign in a much more effective way than any other entity, and they did it. And often they didn't declare their positions. It was really only when environmentalist investigators, science organizations, and others began to unearth tax documents and other disclosures that the extent of this kind of purpose-built campaign was exposed.
Was it effective?
I think so. I mean, you look at public opinion about climate science today, and you can see that there is a great deal more skepticism relative to scientific consensus about this issue than virtually any other scientific issue that has public policy implications that I can think about. It's just that ratio. The scientists are, 97% in one place, and the public is 40% in that place. Now, about smoking's dangers, there's no such gap. About many other scientific issues that create controversial public policy decisions, how much should we tax ourselves to address this problem, how serious is the problem, you don't see those kinds of gaps. And I do think that the campaign was unfortunately effective.
And at the same time, people inside the company were seeking to understand how the company might gain an advantage in a warming world.
Yeah, one of the former scientists that I interviewed said, look, don't believe they didn't think this was real. It was our assignment to discover how a warming planet would free up oil and gas resources, and maybe to get ahead of that so that we could seize those opportunities before others perceive them. And look, the simplest example is in the news right now, which is this enormous agreement that ExxonMobil has made with Rosneft, the Russian oil company, to develop oil and gas above the Arctic Circle. Now, why is that deal possible? It's because Arctic sea ice has been retreating at a very alarming rate, and it is that softening of the ice cap north of the Arctic Circle that has freed up all of this ambition. So it would be, a sad irony if ExxonMobil's shareholders ended up connected through 20 years of dividends to the exploitation of oil north of the Arctic Circle that was partially made possible by the pollution of public understanding of the dangers of global warming.
And one of the things you write about is a University of Wisconsin sociologist who got a call one day from an ExxonMobil person as part of a legal strategy. Tell us that.
Well, he was, I think, a sociologist, and he had studied the question as an academic of how exactly do corporate influence campaigns work. And you get glimpses of them in the documents. There's a document called Informed Influentials that I made some use of that showed how ExxonMobil conceived of its target audiences and how they would seek to reach them and what success looked like. They thought very deeply about these subjects. These are obviously very smart people, and they have a lot of time to focus on hard problems like how you affect elite opinion in westernized democracies. But this sociologist, from an academic perspective, was interested in the same question. So he had written about this to some extent, and he'd also written a little bit about the value of punitive damages in a democracy, how to think about punitive damages in juries. And so he got a call. He'd written something about punitive damages, I guess, that had attracted ExxonMobil's attention. And they called him and basically said, you know, you're thinking about this as the kind of thing we would support. If you were interested in bringing forward some academic journal articles, maybe we could work together. And the sociologist sort of described thinking, well, rather than actually collaborate with this proposal, why don't I actually just document what it is they plan to do? And so he instantly turned this call into a kind of sociological experiment. And he followed the thread all the way through a series of conversations. I think he actually even traveled down to Irving to meet with some of the executives who had contacted him. And then at the end, when he published his experience in a journal of sociology, called a lot of attention to this broader pattern of academic studies that ExxonMobil had used to challenge the validity of punitive damages in the case arising out of the Valdez that went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. And the final punctuation mark on the story is that when the United States Supreme Court ruled on the punitive damages issue in the Valdez, they actually went ExxonMobil's way, but David Souter, the former justice, wrote in a footnote in reference to all of this pleadings that ExxonMobil had presented about punitive damages. He said, because these studies were funded by ExxonMobil, we declined to rely on them. So there's that footnote, but then there's the decision. And that, to me, sort of encapsulates some of the pattern of ExxonMobil's presence in our society. Yes, they are often contested and sometimes exposed, and even in some tactical or communication sense, they can be defeated. But their embeddedness and their persistence and their resources are such that in the long run, they generally end up where they want to go.
And they were thinking in this case about not a jury, but an actual a review court judges who would look more favorably on this kind of
Right.
academic literature.
Right. Thinking what influences a justice.